Welcome to a journey through one of the most unsettling cases ever recorded in the history of the Missouri Ozarks. Before we start, I'd like to invite you to leave a comment about where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested to know which places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach people. Countless stories have been witnessed by the tall pines of the Ozark Mountains across generations, but few are as perplexing as the events of the winter of 1915. The case of Clara Caldwell remains one of the most disturbing, yet least known, chapters in American scientific history, nestled between the rolling hills of southern Missouri in a region where mist clings to valleys and sunlight struggles to penetrate the dense forest canopy. It was a bitter cold morning on December 18, 1915, in Shannon County, Missouri. Isolated on a ridge overlooking the Jacks Fork River, about 7 miles from the nearest town of eminence, stood the Caldwell family home. Sheriff Thomas Lawson was called to the property after neighbors reported seeing no activity for nearly 2 weeks. What he discovered there would confound the scientific community for decades. Alone in the family home, they found 12-year-old Clara Caldwell, surrounded by notebooks filled with mathematical equations and scientific drawings that experts would later describe as impossible for someone of her age and education to produce. Nowhere to be found were her parents, Robert and Mary Caldwell. The house was immaculate. There were no signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play, just a child with an inexplicable knowledge that seemed to have materialized overnight, and parents who had vanished without a trace. Not just the disappearance, but what was discovered in those notebooks is what makes this case particularly unsettling, and how the Caldwell case challenged our very understanding of human cognition, memory, and the boundaries of what we consider possible. Some records suggest Clara's story represents a phenomenon science still struggles to explain, the sudden acquisition of knowledge with no discernible source. It should be noted that much of what follows comes from fragmented sources, before we delve deeper into this disturbing case. These include sheriff's reports from Shannon County, medical evaluations conducted at Missouri State Hospital No. 4, and fragments of academic papers written by researchers who interviewed Clara between 1915 and 1918. Many of these documents were later sealed, and some were reportedly destroyed in a courthouse fire in 1947. What remains are transcribed interviews, newspaper clippings, and the testimony of those who encountered Clara in the years following her parents' disappearance. This is the documented account of Clara Caldwell, the girl whose mind became a vessel for knowledge that no one could explain, and the terrible price that came with it. The Caldwell family had arrived in Shannon County in the spring of 1913. A former railroad engineer from St. Louis, Robert Caldwell had inherited a modest property from a distant uncle. According to county records, the family kept to themselves but weren't considered unusual by local standards. Robert occasionally worked odd jobs in eminence, while Mary sold preserves and quilts at the general store. Their only child, Clara, was described by the local school teacher, Miss Eleanor Whitman, as shy but intelligent, with a particular aptitude for arithmetic. Nothing in the family's background suggested anything extraordinary. Robert had a basic education, having completed 8 grades before working on the railroads. Mary had slightly more schooling, having briefly worked as a shop assistant in St. Louis before marriage. When weather permitted the 7-mile journey, which became increasingly rare as winter approached in late 1915, Clara attended the one-room schoolhouse in Eminence. According to interviews with neighbors conducted by Sheriff Lawson, the Caldwells were private but pleasant. They weren't the type to join in much with town affairs, but Robert would help if someone needed an extra hand with barn raising or such. Hiram Jenkins, whose farm lay about a mile from the Caldwell property, told the sheriff. Mary made the best blackberry preserves in the county. The girl was quiet, always had her nose in a book when you'd see her. Their modest cabin had 3 rooms, a main living area with a kitchen and 2 small bedrooms. A single wood stove heated it, and kerosene lamps lit it. No electricity reached this far into the Ozarks in 1915. The property included a small barn, a chicken coop, and a vegetable garden. By all accounts, the Caldwells lived simply but comfortably. What makes the events of December 1915 so perplexing is the utter normality that preceded them. There were no reports of strange visitors, unusual purchases, or peculiar behavior. The last confirmed sighting of Robert and Mary Caldwell was on December 4, 1915, when Robert purchased supplies at Wilson's General Store in Eminence. His purchases are listed in the store ledger, preserved in the Shannon County Historical Society: flour, coffee, sugar, kerosene, and a tablet of paper. The shop owner, Elias Wilson, later told Sheriff Lawson that Robert seemed perfectly ordinary that day, maybe a bit preoccupied with the coming snow, but nothing that would raise an eyebrow. He mentioned that Robert had said Clara had been taking to her studies with unusual vigor and had requested more paper for her schoolwork. It was the last time anyone in town would see Robert Caldwell. For nearly 2 weeks, no one from the Caldwell family came to town. This wasn't entirely unusual during winter months when the dirt roads became nearly impassable after heavy snow. But when smoke ceased rising from their chimney despite the bitter cold, neighbor Hiram Jenkins grew concerned enough to alert Sheriff Lawson. What they found at the Caldwell home that December morning would become the first page in one of the most disturbing and inexplicable cases in the region's history, a case that remains open in the dusty archives of Shannon County to this day. Winding through dense pine forest and crossing the Jacks Fork River via a narrow footbridge was the path to the Caldwell cabin. After a difficult journey through nearly 2 feet of snow, Sheriff Lawson and Hiram Jenkins arrived around 10 a.m. on December 18. In a sworn statement that still exists in county records, Jenkins would later describe the scene: "Something felt wrong the minute we crossed that bridge. No tracks in the snow, no smoke, no sound, not even birds. Just that cabin sitting there like it was holding its breath." After knocking repeatedly with no response, Sheriff Lawson found the door unlocked, which was unusual for that isolated area. The house was cold inside but immaculately clean. Only ash was in the wood stove in the main room, with no active embers. A half-empty cup of tea sat on the table, its contents frozen solid. There were no signs of struggle, no evidence of a hasty departure. Robert and Mary's clothing still hung on pegs by the door. Their few valuables, Mary's mother's silver brooch, Robert's pocket watch, remained on the mantel. In the main bedroom, the bed was made with hospital corners, as if no one had slept in it for days. Robert's work boot stood by the bedside. On a small vanity table lay Mary's hairbrush, strands of dark hair still caught in the bristles. It was in Clara's room that Sheriff Lawson made the discovery that would confound experts for decades to come. The child sat at a small desk by the window, alive but in what the sheriff described as a trance-like state. She didn't respond to questions or seem to register their presence. Her room was warm, the only warm space in the house, though no fire burned in any stove or fireplace. The walls of Clara's small bedroom were covered with drawings, equations, and diagrams, hundreds of them, some pinned up, others drawn directly onto the wooden walls. Littering her desk were notebooks filled with dense writing and complex mathematical formulas. With only a basic education, Sheriff Lawson couldn't make sense of what he was seeing. But he knew enough to recognize that these were not the scribblings of a typical 12-year-old girl from rural Missouri. Most disturbing of all were Clara's hands, stained with ink to the wrists, as if she had been writing continuously for days. When the sheriff gently touched her shoulder, she turned slowly, her eyes focusing with apparent difficulty, and spoke the words that would be recorded in his official report: "They're gone. They had to go. The numbers needed room." Sheriff Lawson immediately sent Jenkins to town for the doctor while he remained with Clara. In his report, he noted that the girl eventually became more responsive, accepting water but refusing food. She continued to write in her notebooks, pausing only when directly interrupted. When asked about her parents, she would only repeat, "They had to make room." That evening, Dr. William Hayes arrived from Eminence. His medical report, filed with the county clerk and later referenced in academic papers, described Clara as physically healthy but mentally altered. Her pulse, temperature, and reflexes were normal, but her behavior was not. "The child exhibits a singular focus on mathematical and scientific notation beyond my ability to comprehend," Dr. Hayes wrote. "She speaks clearly when addressed but returns immediately to her calculations when not engaged. Most concerning is her apparent lack of distress at her parents' absence." Dr. Hayes arranged for Clara to be taken to his home in Eminence that night. While Sheriff Lawson and several deputies searched the property and surrounding woods for any sign of Robert and Mary Caldwell, they found nothing. No footprints in the snow, no evidence of violence, no indication of where the couple might have gone or what might have happened to them. The mystery of the Caldwells had only begun to unfold. What followed would challenge the boundaries of scientific understanding and reveal something far more disturbing than a simple case of missing persons. In the days following Clara's discovery, Sheriff Lawson organized searches of increasingly wider areas around the Caldwell property. Teams of men from Eminence and neighboring communities combed the dense forests, dragged sections of the Jacks Fork River, and checked abandoned mines and caves that dotted the Ozark landscape. No trace of Robert or Mary Caldwell was ever found. Meanwhile, Clara remained at Dr. Hayes's home under observation. The doctor's wife, Judith Hayes, kept a daily journal of Clara's behavior. These entries, later submitted as evidence in the investigation, describe a child who slept very little, ate mechanically when food was placed before her, and spent almost every waking moment writing or drawing. Mrs. Hayes noted that Clara would use any available surface, paper, pages torn from books, even the walls, if not provided with sufficient writing materials. December 21, 1915. Clara filled 7 full tablets today with what William says appears to be advanced mathematics and scientific formulas. One entry reads, "When I asked where she learned such things, she looked at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. I didn't learn them," she said. "They're just there now." The child shows no distress over her parents, which troubles me greatly. It's as if she's forgotten them entirely or, worse, sees their absence as inconsequential. Word of the strange case spread quickly through Shannon County and beyond. On December the 23rd, having traveled from Columbia after hearing about the case from a colleague with family in the area, Professor James Morgan from the University of Missouri arrived in Eminence. A mathematician with an interest in prodigies, Morgan was initially skeptical of reports about a backwoods girl suddenly displaying advanced scientific knowledge. His skepticism vanished upon meeting Clara. "What I witnessed today defies rational explanation," Morgan wrote in a letter to his department chair, later published in the university's academic journal. The child, with no access to advanced education or materials, is producing work in the fields of non-Euclidean geometry, differential equations, and what appears to be theoretical physics that would challenge our most accomplished graduate students. Morgan spent 3 days reviewing Clara's notebooks. With the permission of Sheriff Lawson, who had been appointed her temporary guardian, he brought several pages back to the university for analysis. Experts in various scientific fields confirmed that the work was not only legitimate but contained several novel approaches to existing problems in physics and mathematics. Most disturbing was Clara's apparent lack of understanding about how she came to possess this knowledge. When questioned directly by Professor Morgan, she responded with unnerving simplicity, "I went to sleep, and when I woke up, the numbers were there. They're so loud now. They needed more room." By early January 1916, Clara's case had attracted attention from scientific and medical communities across the Midwest. The search for her parents had been scaled back, with most locals believing the couple had either met with an accident in the wilderness or had abandoned their child for reasons unknown. Neither theory explained the transformation in Clara herself. On January 12, 1916, at the recommendation of both Dr. Hayes and Professor Morgan, Clara was transferred to Missouri State Hospital No. 4 in Farmington for more comprehensive evaluation. The admission records, preserved in state archives, list her condition as acute mental alteration of unknown origin with savant-like manifestations. What followed was a series of examinations and tests that would only deepen the mystery surrounding Clara Caldwell and raise disturbing questions about the nature of human consciousness, knowledge, and what might happen when something outside our understanding takes residence in a human mind. The journey from Eminence to Farmington took nearly 2 days by wagon and train in the January snow. Sheriff Lawson and Dr. Hayes accompanied Clara. According to Hayes's notes from the journey, Clara remained docile but continued her writing whenever possible. During the train portion of the trip, she filled 14 pages with equations. When Hayes asked what she was calculating, she replied, "The motion of the train. The vibrations have patterns. I need to record them." Established in 1903, Missouri State Hospital No. 4 was considered one of the more progressive mental health facilities of its time. Under the direction of Dr. Franklin Pierce, the hospital took a scientific approach to mental illness, attempting to classify and understand conditions rather than simply confine patients. Clara's admission records indicate she was placed in the children's ward under the direct supervision of Dr. Eleanor Reed, one of the few female psychiatrists practicing in Missouri at that time. Dr. Reed's detailed case notes provide the most comprehensive documentation of Clara's condition during the early months of 1916. Patient exhibits extraordinary cognitive abilities in specific domains, mathematics, physics, astronomy, with no prior training or exposure to advanced concepts in these fields, she wrote. Physically, she appears normal for her age and development. Basic neurological examinations reveal no abnormalities. She is oriented to person and place but seems to have an altered perception of time, often unable to distinguish between recent and distant past. Dr. Reed conducted a series of interviews with Clara, transcripts of which were preserved in the hospital archives until they were reportedly classified and removed by government officials in 1954. Copies of some sessions, however, remained in Professor Morgan's personal papers, which were donated to the University of Missouri archives after his death in 1948. In one particularly revealing session from February 1916, Dr. Reed attempted to understand the origin of Clara's knowledge. Dr. Reed: Clara, can you tell me how you know these things you write about? Clara: I told you. They're just there now. Dr. Reed: but these are complex ideas that most adults don't understand. You didn't know these things before December. Correct, Clara. Clara: before the cold night. Before they went away. Dr. Reed: your parents. Clara: they had to make room. It was getting crowded. Dr. Reed: what was getting crowded, Clara? Clara: long pause, my head. But it's not just my head anymore. It goes all the way down now. Sometimes I can feel it in my fingers and toes. The knowing. Dr. Reed: did something happen on that cold night? Clara: the sky opened. Not for everyone. Just for me. It poured in like water, except it wasn't wet. It was heavy, like honey, but sharper. They tried to make it stop. They couldn't. Dr. Reed: who tried to make it stop? Clara: becomes agitated, they did. They put their hands on my head. They prayed. They cried. But it kept coming, and there wasn't enough room for all of us. Dr. Reed's notes following this session indicate her growing concern. Patient appears to be describing some form of dissociative episode or psychotic break, she wrote. Yet her cognitive functions remain intact. Most disturbing is her continued implication that her parents' disappearance was somehow connected to her sudden acquisition of knowledge. While I hesitate to give credence to such a suggestion, the timing cannot be ignored. Throughout February and March 1916, Clara was subjected to numerous tests designed to verify the authenticity of her knowledge and determine its source. Professors from Washington University in St. Louis, the University of Missouri, and even 2 researchers from Johns Hopkins traveled to Farmington to evaluate her case. Each expert left with more questions than answers. Clara could solve complex mathematical problems without showing her work. She could draw detailed astronomical charts of solar systems not yet discovered. She demonstrated knowledge of physical principles that, while consistent with existing theory, extended into areas not yet explored by the scientific community of 1916. Most remarkably, when presented with scientific journals in German, French, or Russian, languages she had never studied, Clara could identify errors in the mathematical formulations, though she couldn't translate the text itself. As one researcher noted, it's as if she has access to the pure language of mathematics and physics, unfiltered by human linguistic constructs. By April 1916, Clara's case had attracted the attention of the national press. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch ran a front-page story titled, "Missouri's Miracle Child, the Girl Who Knows Too Much." While the article focused on the sensational aspects of Clara's abilities, it mentioned almost as an afterthought the still unsolved disappearance of her parents. This publicity brought unwelcome attention to the quiet hospital. Dr. Pierce noted in his administrative log that various individuals claiming to represent scientific, religious, and even military interests began appearing, requesting access to Clara. Most were denied, but records indicate that on April 22, 1916, 2 men identifying themselves as representatives from the Department of War were granted a private interview with Clara. No transcript of this meeting exists in public records. What is documented, however, is that shortly after this visit, Clara's condition began to deteriorate in ways that would add another layer of disturbance to an already unsettling case. The spring of 1916 marked a turning point in Clara's case. Dr. Reed's notes from late April document the first signs of physical deterioration. Patient complains of headaches that increase in severity when she attempts to write or calculate. Episodes of nosebleeds have begun, particularly following periods of intense cognitive activity. By May, Clara's mathematical output had decreased significantly, though what she did produce was described by visiting experts as increasingly abstract and complex. Professor Morgan, who continued to visit regularly, wrote that her work had moved beyond established mathematical frameworks into something I can only describe as a new language of numbers and space. Clara's physical condition, meanwhile, continued to decline. Hospital records indicate rapid weight loss despite a monitored diet. Her sleep became erratic, with nurses reporting that she would sometimes remain awake for 50, 60 hours straight, writing continuously, then collapse into deep sleep for similar periods. During these deep sleep phases, staff noted that her body temperature would drop significantly, sometimes to as low as 94 degrees Fahrenheit. Most concerning were the changes in Clara's demeanor. The docile, cooperative child was replaced by someone increasingly agitated and, at times, hostile. Dr. Reed documented an incident in early June when Clara became enraged after a nurse removed some of her papers for filing. Patient lunged at Nurse Sullivan with unexpected strength, scratching her face and arms while screaming, "They're not finished. The pattern isn't complete." It took 2 orderlies to restrain her, after which she collapsed and remained unconscious for nearly 14 hours. Upon waking, she had no memory of the incident and resumed her calculations as if nothing had happened. During this period, Clara began to speak of visitors who came to her room at night. Hospital staff initially dismissed these claims as hallucinations, but night nurse Martha Cunningham recorded a disturbing entry in the ward log on June 14, 1916. Checked on patient CC at 2:15 a.m. after hearing voices from her room. Found her sitting upright in bed, seemingly conversing with an empty chair beside her bed. She was speaking in what sounded like Latin or some similar language I don't recognize, interspersed with numbers and terms I couldn't understand. When she noticed me, she stopped mid-sentence and said in perfect clarity, "They're measuring how much is left. It's not enough anymore." I checked the entire ward and grounds. No unauthorized persons were present. By July 1916, Dr. Reed had begun to consider a disturbing possibility, one she was hesitant to include in official records but confided to Professor Morgan in a personal letter found among his papers. "I am forced to consider whether whatever knowledge or ability manifested in Clara might be consuming her physically. The correlation between her cognitive output and physical deterioration is too strong to dismiss. It's as if her mind is a vessel for something too vast for her physical form to contain." This theory gained support when Dr. Reed conducted a simple experiment. For 1 week in late July, Clara was gently but firmly prevented from any mathematical work. Her writing materials were removed, and she was engaged in normal activities for a child her age, simple games, reading fiction, outdoor walks when weather permitted. During this period, her physical symptoms improved dramatically. Her weight stabilized, the headaches decreased, and no nosebleeds were recorded. When the restriction was lifted, however, Clara returned to her calculations with renewed intensity. Within hours, all her symptoms returned, worse than before. Dr. Reed wrote, "It appears that whatever drives her to pursue this knowledge is stronger than her instinct for self-preservation." When asked why she continues despite the pain, she simply stated, "It has to be finished. They're waiting for it." By August 1916, the hospital staff was forced to make difficult decisions regarding Clara's care. Her physical deterioration had become critical, with her weight dropping to dangerous levels and episodes of unconsciousness becoming more frequent. Yet attempts to restrict her access to writing materials resulted in such extreme distress that Dr. Pierce feared for her mental stability. A compromise was reached. Clara would be allowed to write for limited periods each day under supervision. The hope was that this measured approach might slow her decline while research into her condition continued. But as summer turned to fall, it became increasingly clear that something would have to change if Clara Caldwell was to survive. That change came in September 1916 from an unexpected source and would open yet another disturbing chapter in this already unsettling case. On September 7, 1916, a woman arrived at Missouri State Hospital No. 4, claiming to be Elizabeth Caldwell, Robert Caldwell's sister from Illinois. Hospital records indicate that she presented documentation confirming her identity and relationship to Clara, including family photographs and correspondence with Robert that predated the family's move to Missouri. Elizabeth Caldwell was described by hospital staff as a well-dressed, educated woman of about 40 years of age, composed in manner but clearly distressed about her niece's condition. After reviewing Clara's medical files, she requested a private meeting with Dr. Pierce and Dr. Reed. The content of this meeting was not recorded in official hospital documents, but Dr. Reed's personal diary, discovered after her death in 1962, contains a troubling entry from that day. Met with EC regarding Clara. What she shared has left me deeply unsettled. According to Elizabeth, the Caldwell family has a history of what she terms episodes, instances where family members exhibited sudden, inexplicable knowledge or abilities. Robert himself apparently experienced something similar as a child, though far less extreme than Clara's case. Most disturbing is her claim that 3 previous Caldwell children died before reaching adulthood, all after displaying similar symptoms. Elizabeth believes Clara's parents fled to the Ozarks specifically to isolate her from doctors or authorities who might take interest in her should such an episode occur. The question remains, if Elizabeth's account is accurate, where are Robert and Mary now? And why would they abandon Clara after going to such lengths to protect her? Within days of Elizabeth's arrival, arrangements were made for Clara to be released into her aunt's custody. Dr. Pierce's final report indicates this decision was influenced by Clara's declining health and Elizabeth's assurance that she would continue to work with medical professionals near her home in Springfield, Illinois. The report also notes that Elizabeth presented a letter, apparently written by Robert Caldwell before his disappearance, naming her as Clara's guardian should anything happen to him and Mary. Professor Morgan strongly objected to Clara's release, arguing that more research was needed and that moving her might be dangerous in her weakened condition. His concerns were overruled. On September 12, 1916, Clara Caldwell left Missouri State Hospital No. 4 with Elizabeth, traveling by private automobile to Illinois. What happened in the years that followed has been pieced together from fragmented sources, occasional correspondence between Elizabeth and Dr. Reed, records from Illinois medical institutions, and an incomplete investigation conducted by Professor Morgan in 1922. According to letters sent to Dr. Reed, Elizabeth took Clara to a private residence outside Springfield, where she was attended by a doctor, Thomas Blackwood, described as a specialist in nervous disorders. Under his care, Clara's physical condition allegedly stabilized, though she never fully recovered her strength. Her episodes of mathematical insight reportedly became less frequent and less intense, allowing for periods of what Elizabeth described as near normality. In her last letter to Dr. Reed, dated March 1918, Elizabeth wrote, "Clara has good days now where she seems like any young girl. She has taken an interest in gardening and can sometimes go whole weeks without reverting to her calculations." Dr. Blackwood believes the episodes may eventually cease entirely as she matures. "We dare to hope for a future for her, though we are careful not to expose her to undue stimulation or interest from those who might seek to exploit her condition." This was the last known correspondence regarding Clara's condition. Hospital records indicate that Dr. Reed made several attempts to follow up, but her letters went unanswered. In 1920, she enlisted Professor Morgan's help in locating Clara, concerned about her former patient's well-being. Morgan's investigation, documented in his personal papers, revealed a disturbing conclusion. The address in Springfield where Elizabeth claimed to have taken Clara did not exist. Dr. Thomas Blackwood was not registered with any medical association in Illinois or surrounding states. Most troublingly, when Morgan traced the Caldwell family history, he found no record of Robert Caldwell having a sister named Elizabeth, or any sister at all. Whoever had taken Clara from the hospital in September 1916 had apparently created an elaborate fiction. Clara Caldwell, the mysterious child whose mind had somehow accessed knowledge beyond her years, had vanished from record as completely as her parents had vanished from their cabin in the Ozarks. The final documented chapter of Clara Caldwell's story comes from an unexpected source. In 1938, a researcher from the University of Chicago named Dr. Harold Bennett was conducting a study on mathematical prodigies when he came across references to Clara's case in Professor Morgan's published papers. Intrigued, Bennett began his own investigation, tracking down surviving witnesses and collecting whatever records remained. Bennett's search led him to a sanitarium in northern Wisconsin, where he discovered a woman in her mid-30s registered under the name Jane Doe. The woman, who had been a resident since 1924, was nonverbal and spent her days filling notebooks with increasingly abstract mathematical symbols that the staff had long since stopped trying to understand. The attending physician, Dr. Ruth Crawford, told Bennett that Jane had been brought to the facility by a middle-aged woman who paid for 10 years of care in advance and never returned. The woman had claimed Jane was her niece and had suffered a nervous breakdown following the death of her parents but provided no documentation to support this story or reveal the patient's true identity. When Bennett showed Dr. Crawford photographs of Clara Caldwell taken at Missouri State Hospital No. 4, the doctor confirmed the resemblance to their mysterious patient, though she noted that years of illness had taken a toll on the woman's appearance. What convinced Bennett he had found Clara, however, were the notebooks. They contained calculations that, according to mathematicians who later reviewed them, represented a direct evolution of the work Clara had done as a child, a continuation of the same mysterious mathematical language. Bennett arranged to visit the sanitarium several times over the next year, attempting to establish communication with the woman he believed to be Clara. According to his notes, published posthumously in the Journal of Abnormal Psychology in 1964, he achieved limited success. During his fourth visit, the woman looked directly at him for the first time and spoke her only recorded words in nearly 15 years, "It's almost complete now. They're coming back for it soon." 3 days after this interaction, on January 17, 1940, the woman known as Jane Doe was found dead in her room. Dr. Crawford's report indicated the cause as heart failure, though she noted the unusual circumstances. Patient was discovered seated at her desk, pen still in hand, having apparently completed a final page of calculations moments before death. Her expression was described by the attending nurse as peaceful, almost relieved. The notebooks filled during her 16 years at the sanitarium were collected by Bennett for analysis. Mathematical experts who examined them described the work as revolutionary but incomprehensible, a system that seemed to follow internal logic but could not be reconciled with existing mathematical frameworks. In 1954, Bennett's research materials, including Clara's notebooks from the sanitarium, were reportedly confiscated by government officials. Bennett himself accepted a position with a classified research project and never published his full findings on the Caldwell case. What happened to the original notebooks from 1915 to 1916, those collected by Professor Morgan from the Caldwell cabin and Missouri State Hospital No. 4, remains unknown. The final twist in this disturbing story came in 1962 when a construction crew excavating for a new road near the former Caldwell property in the Ozarks uncovered human remains. Forensic examination determined they were of a man and woman approximately in their 30s who had died in the 1915 to 1916 time frame. Due to the condition of the remains and the limitations of forensic science in the 1960s, positive identification was impossible, but circumstantial evidence strongly suggested they were Robert and Mary Caldwell. What was most disturbing about the discovery wasn't the bodies themselves, but how they were found. According to the coroner's report, the remains were arranged in a precise geometric pattern that one investigator with mathematical training recognized as representing an equation, the same unusual notation found in Clara's earliest notebooks. The Caldwell case was officially closed in 1963. The official conclusion listed in Shannon County records states simply, Robert and Mary Caldwell, deceased by means unknown. Clara Caldwell, whereabouts unknown, presumed deceased. But questions remain that no official conclusion can answer. What happened in that cabin in December 1915? What knowledge took residence in the mind of a 12-year-old girl from the Ozarks? And perhaps most disturbingly, what was she calculating all those years? And who or what was waiting for the result? The mathematics Clara produced has been described by modern experts who have seen fragments of her work as beyond our current framework, possibly representing concepts we won't develop for another century. Some theorists have suggested her work anticipated aspects of quantum mechanics, string theory, and multidimensional mathematics decades before mainstream science approached these concepts. Others maintain that Clara was simply a natural prodigy whose abilities emerged under traumatic circumstances and whose deterioration was the result of untreated physical and psychological conditions. This explanation, however, fails to account for the sudden onset of her abilities, the disappearance of her parents, and the geometric arrangement of the remains found in 1962. What we know with certainty is this: something happened to Clara Caldwell in the winter of 1915 that transformed a normal child into a vessel for knowledge that her mind could access but her body could not sustain. Whatever entered her consciousness that cold December night in the Ozarks was both a gift and a terrible burden, one that ultimately consumed her life as surely as it had taken her parents. In the archives of the Shannon County Historical Society, a single page from one of Clara's original notebooks has been preserved behind glass. The mathematics on the page remains largely indecipherable to modern experts. But in the margin, written in a child's careful hand, is a note that perhaps comes closest to explaining what happened: the knowing wants out. It wasn't meant to be kept inside something as small as a person. Some secrets are perhaps better left buried in the deep forests of the Ozarks, where the pines still whisper when winter winds blow down from the mountains, and where locals still avoid the overgrown path that once led to the Caldwell cabin. For in the silence of those woods, something still echoes, the sound of a pencil scratching endlessly on paper, calculating truths too vast for our understanding, waiting for someone else who might provide room for the knowing.